Welcome back. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic has forced Africa to review the way it does business. African countries are encouraged to work together in order to fight the economic meltdown that the pandemic has brought. Now, the pandemic has also given African leaders a chance to de-colonise, as it were, their economies and press the restart button on the African economy. Let's chat more about this and what exactly does it mean. Yamkela Makupula is the CEO of Diaz Reus Africa. It's a good afternoon to you, Yamkela. A difficult task, but certainly one would think that you never waste a good crisis, and that might be what this is.
Thank you so much, Aravile, and I'm glad that you're calling it a good crisis, because as much as it's a crisis, it's also presenting us an opportunity as Africans. And, you know, every time we speak about African leaders, people are always looking at political leaders and policy makers. But then also we have to look at the business leaders in Africa, because for the longest time, also as business sector, we've been highly divided in the way we're doing things. Hence, we brought the dependency that we have as Africa on either Asia or the West, which is still unfortunate. I'm just going to give a quick example of the market that is currently running right now of selling masks. You know, the masks that we have to sell in order for us to observe social distancing and safety and all those things. And it scares me to see that everyone is busy moving to go buy these things in China. And, you know, and we're looking in a situation where you export, let's say, per item for 20, 30 rands. By the time you take it to the market, it's 40 rands plus VAT, and that it gets sold by a multinational company for even 90 rands. We've seen this, it's happening. How about as Africans to say that instead of African leaders taking pictures and going to villages, giving our people masks that are written made in China, it would be so refreshing to see them going to our people, going there, carrying, you know, equipment for our people to sell. You and I know that our mama in the village, it just takes 5 of them with sewing machines that is provided by government, and all the things that they need for them to sit down and start selling. And our people can afford that mask for literally 12 rand. Then we have created our own economy. So we might look at
Yamkela, how do we change this though? The problem becomes we're sort of entrenched in our old ways. And yes, this is the great equalizer, if you want to call it that as well. We're all on the same playing field, sort of needing to just survive at the very least for quite a few people. But we're so entrenched in our old ways. How do we change things like trade? Things like who we actually speak to a whole lot more, the kind of languages we speak, all of those little things, including, of course, economic factors as well. How does Africa reset right now?
We have to change our conversation on the way we're receiving trade, on the way we're receiving aid, because for the longest time, aid meant that, you know, when it comes to these big countries, they would say, I'm going to give aid to Africa. But what that means is that I have to be in charge of your economy, because I have to look after how you spend money. But then your countries like Germany, Japan, if you go and read, at some point they used to be receiving aid. And what they did, they put a 20-year plan to say, how do we come up with a plan that in 20 years' time, we're no longer the recipients of aid, but we are the givers of aid. And now that's where they are. But then they didn't do it in silos and sitting, you know, it has to be an Africa continent integrated strategy. It is the only way we are going to do it. Going divided in South Africa, I think we keep saying this, it's not going to happen. Aid is one of the biggest factors, and we're seeing a lot of aid that is coming right now, but we don't know what the result of it is going to be in 10 years' time, and we can't go and advise our leaders not to take aid. We have to take the aid. But then what conversations are we saying? What agreements are we signing as we are receiving that aid? is it not at the detriment of our people in the future? So we've got to look at those things.
Yamkela, do you think that there's a whole lot more perhaps communication now, despite the fact that we can't go and see each other and meet in boardrooms or meet in other countries, but perhaps a little more integration, a little more communication now between particularly African Union countries? If one takes a look at the kind of meetings that are happening, there are briefings almost every second day at the very least from African leaders of sorts. Is that the right kind of conversation that you think we're currently having?
Well, Arabile, we've seen that our African leaders have really come into play in meeting and having these conversations. But then what we are not seeing there is conversations that are saying that we are going to redirect our money as Africa into manufacturing, for instance. Malawi and Benin stop sending cotton to other countries and then it comes back as clothes. We need to start manufacturing our own clothes. South Africa and Lesotho, you won't send hemp to Europe and then it comes back as medical supplies and oil. You will manufacture yourself.
All right. Well, Yamkela, it gets very difficult in a time like this. I can imagine as well for, countries that are extremely dependent on others as well. And then you have your oil exporting countries, the likes of Nigeria as well, which certainly need as much help as possible. Doesn't help that you have the oil price sitting as low as it currently sits as well. Are we getting enough advice, do you think? Are we getting this sort of discussion point with our leaders as well as a starting point?
The role of a leader, Arabile, you and I will agree that during the time of crisis is to think beyond the crisis. So these conversations, we can't postpone them for when the crisis is gone. It has to be conversations. This is where we have to be resetting that button on our African economies. And we've got to look at manufacturing. We've got to look at improving our infrastructure. We've got to look at improving our ways of communication. And the leaders have to, as much as we're dealing with COVID-19, but what comes beyond that? That's the biggest opportunity that we need to be sitting in, both in private sector and public sector. And let's stop excusing private sector leaders for them owning the African region, because it belongs to them and they need to make tough decisions on behalf of Africa.
Time to press the restart button. Yamkela Makupula, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it. As we perhaps talk about how we can restart the economy, the great equalizer is perhaps what the coronavirus is. Almost puts us all in some sort of level playing field when it comes to needs, when it comes to trying to find the best solutions to ensure that your country moves forward as well. So very, very critical to get that discussion right. Yamkela Makupula is the CEO of Diaz Reus Africa there, joining us via Skype.